Hello, friends. This is Adrian Sinclair, and this is a podcast with interesting people. My guest today is Cody Crabb, a fellow podcaster and YouTuber. And the topic of today's episode is how to create your own podcast, lessons learned from our mistakes. So stay tuned. Listen to this podcast episode. If you like the content, it was helpful to you, then please subscribe and share with others and leave a comment below. Thanks. Welcome, friends. This is Adrian Sinclair with a podcast with interesting people. And today, my guest is Cody Crabb, who is a podcaster. And today's podcast is going to be about podcasting. Welcome to the show, Cody. How are you, man?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
So, podcasting and you know doing YouTube videos, always experimenting with different things. Today, I'm trying a different angle because I realized when I'm recording video podcasts I have my setup where I just look straight at the camera. It just kind of later when we're editing, it just kind of looks weird. And so today I'm trying a different angle. So we'll see what the audience is thinking about that. But let's get into a little bit about you. How did you start podcasting? Why did you start podcasting? And I want to kind of learn from your experience, what did you learn, how long you've been doing. You have 2 podcasts and a YouTube channel. So you're a busy man. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, Cody.
Yeah, sure. So my first love is music. That's really where I come from. That's the world that I'm the most familiar with. I went to college to be a music producer and composer. To write film music. That's really what I wanted to do. I looked at like John Williams and those people, and I just was like, that's what I want to do. And I was always obsessed with film music. And so for a while, and early in college, I was reaching out to podcasters saying, I'll write music for you. And because I thought, hey, it's an audio format. I didn't know anything about podcasting. I didn't even listen to podcasts at the time, like not a single one. But I got in touch with this guy who had me write a full score to every single episode of his podcast. He's a traveler, and he had other travelers on as well. So that got me listening to every single episode because I had to write a full score to every single episode. And I started really liking the format. And then before you know it, I have like 20 plus different podcasts in my queue, and I just kind of fell in love with the format. And I kind of was always just waiting on, what am I going to start my podcast about? And one day, a fellow composer, her name is Rachel, she posted a jokey Facebook status that was like, what am I going to start a podcast about? Like, what should I do? And I was like, I had talked to her so many times about like, doing what you love and like following your dreams and things like that. And it was just so obvious that that's what we were going to do. And I messaged her and I said, if you're serious, let's actually do it. And in 30 days, we had our first episode uploaded and ready to go and posted. So I definitely think that it was I kind of was just waiting for the opportunity. And then once it came, I was like, all right, let's do this.
So podcasting is such an interesting field, and it seems like there's gazillions of them out there. And I was actually going to pull up some stats, like how many millions of different podcasts are out there. Why do you think there's so many of them? And isn't the space already overcrowded with, saturated, as they say, with podcasts? And you have 2, man.
I'm saturating it myself. I'm part of the problem.
So what do you think about that?
So
like the number of podcasts.
Yeah. So actually, I just read a stat that it's about 1 million now total on Apple Podcasts. The interesting thing about that, though, is so that doesn't take into account a lot of different information. That doesn't take into account podcasts that are done, that are no longer posting episodes. Right. That doesn't take into account podcasts that haven't posted episodes in or more than a year ago or longer. So it's hard to really. That number is kind of tricky. I think it's less than 1 million, but really, when you think about it, 1 million is really not that many. Right. Even if we say 750,000, I mean, think about how many that really is, and think of, I don't know, YouTube. YouTube's a totally different world, and there are like 10 times as many, way more than 10 times as many channels, millions and millions and millions and millions of channels. And it's, I'm not going to say it's not saturated, because of course it is. That happens every time there's a medium like this. People start making content, and then there's copycats of the copycats of the copycats. But the thing is, really, quality is what counts. And you don't have to, the cool thing I like about podcasting is you don't have to have this massive audience. You don't have to have millions of listeners to really make an impact, as long as you're impacting the people that you want to impact. That's what I think is so neat about it.
Yeah, I agree. It's even if you influence, even if you add value to one person and change their lives for the better, or share some piece of information, or have a guest that shares piece of information that helps someone, I think it's still worth it. It's my wife says it's a very therapeutic activity too. It's a, when you talk, it's almost like talk therapy in a way. When you have guests, you talk to them.
You get stuff out. Yeah, you just go through
right?
stuff.
Right, and it's a I personally love it. I'm a lifelong learner, so I love learning new things. Mm-hmm. And every guest has a different story, different perspective, and different knowledge to share. So for me, this is a win-win. And like you said, even if it's 750,000 podcasts out there, or even 1 million, considering that there is almost 8 billion people, that's still like, orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
So even if you have one, podcast and 1,000 people that are, that's all your whole audience, that's still a lot. That's still a platform. That's still a wonderful place to share information. So you have not
and the tools have never been easier too. The tools have never been easier and more free and cheaper to use. I mean, I can buy a microphone that sounds amazing, like studio quality stuff, for like $100. I can dip into a room with little echo. I can use free tools to edit and post my podcast. I can do it basically for no money. And I think that's really, I love that the barrier of entry has gone so low to almost nothing now. And I think that invites a lot of garbage, but I think it also opens the door to a lot of stuff that wouldn't otherwise exist. And that's what's so cool about it.
So do you think that because there's just so much content produced, I think there's like a couple hundred hours every minute on YouTube. I don't know what the stats are for podcasts, but considering a lot of information being created, do you think that it's going to be a case of may the best content win, or is it going to be just kind of compartments or little pockets of audiences that will somehow find your podcast? What do you think is going to happen in a couple of years? Do you think this trend is going to kind of come down, or is it going to continue in growth in numbers, or what do you predict?
Well, podcasting is still in its infancy, really. I mean, it's brand new in terms of even just existing, let alone like being more prevalent. I mean, it's just now starting to be more of a thing in the mainstream, as of just a few years ago, I think. But the thing that I think is really the thing to watch here is, so in maybe 2016, 2017, I started to notice corporate podcasts. I noticed podcast networks that were a lot more like they had celebrities, and they had all the money and the investors, and like a Gimlet and Maximum Fun, and these ones that are like big name podcast networks. They are the ones that are obviously getting a ton of views. The interesting thing here, though, is as a format, I think there's no such thing as. I think it's a good thing that they're bringing people to the platform, because when you're looking at video, everyone watches video. That's just something that you have on your phone, your computer. Everyone is on YouTube, Right. But the difference with podcasts is if you don't listen to podcasts, you're not like a podcast listener. So I feel like any big podcast that brings people to the platform, nobody listens to one podcast. I mean, I'm sure people do, but I think it's way more common to have at least like a handful that you listen to regularly. And so in my opinion, there are going to be those ones that dominate, the Joe Rogans of the world, and the people that just totally dominate the charts. But on the other hand, there's also going to be a market of people that have their podcasts that they listen to regularly, but then they have a bunch of empty slots. And it's your job to find and fill those slots, I think.
That's an interesting um, thought on that. It's at first when I was starting, that's what people were saying. Oh, it just the market is just so saturated. Why are you doing this? And I said, like, you know what? I'm doing this for myself because I love talking to people and learning from them. And this is such a perfect platform to do that. You know, bringing in new guests and
Yeah.
just kind of learning new things and then sharing that. That's kind of like the point of this whole thing. The
And that's why we started ours too, because it started out as kind of like we want to inspire people to do like their dream job or whatever. But as we moved on, we realized we wanted to talk to people that were more like um, just people that inspired us, that were like doing something that was so neat that we wanted to share their story. A perfect example: we interviewed William Hung, the guy from American Idol, because he's a public speaker now. And I was like, how do you even get to that point? And so we just were talking to him, and it really puts things into perspective hearing stories like that. And even if it's just for me, like I would do it just for me. Like I got to interview William Hung. It was cool. But it's cool that we get to share that. And,
So, for those who are considering starting a new podcast, share some of the top tips that you've learned. Um, and probably one of the questions that will be prevailing out there is like, well, how do you get these big celebrities to come onto your show when you're just starting and you have like very little people listening to you still and you're still building it up. So, what are your thoughts on that? How did you get him on your show?
everyone's going to be mad at this answer, but I sent him an email. That's how I got it. I asked him. And you would be shocked at who would say yes to you if you just reach out and ask. We actually are going to have, I can't really say too much about it yet, but we're going to have a very well known YouTuber on our show tomorrow. We're interviewing him tomorrow. And it's just one of those, like, we just said, hey, do you want to be on our podcast? And without going, he probably won't want to. He probably doesn't have time. Why would he want to be on our small podcast? We just are like, let's just ask. Why not?
Right.
And he said yes. And so, but I also think part of the key is kind of targeting, finding people whose audience is your audience, like where the overlap is. They don't necessarily need to get much out of it, I think that's a common misconception is people go, I'm not going to invite that person on because what are they going to get out of this chat? I think it's more about saying like, I want to offer your audience that you love so much, I want to offer them something too. And you are the perfect person to help me offer them that thing. And I think that attitude really has helped us a lot. It's gotten us guests that we probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And really just asking, honestly, that's how you get people that you don't think you could get, is just straight up emailing someone or something like that. But as far as starting a new podcast, I would say top things. Don't worry too much about doing it perfectly. No podcast has started at 100%. I definitely didn't start at 100% because I hadn't barely listened to any podcasts yet. It takes time to find your groove and find your voice and things like that. And maybe you'll start another podcast later that is more in line with how you want to be. But just start. Doing a podcast, recording, producing, publishing an episode is going to teach you more about making a podcast than any amount of reading online or doing, following tutorials or listening to this guy's big dumb head will ever teach you, because it's just the process. You have to learn by doing. It's just one of those things, especially audio, because there's so many things you can do wrong and you don't realize you're doing it until it's too late. So just start. Just if you have an idea, go make some art. There's a bunch of websites you can make a podcast cover on. Canva.com, that's my favorite one. Make an album cover, then go to anchor.fm. That's your website. It's perfect. It's free. It does everything you need it to do, especially if you're just starting out. And then upload your audio and let people listen to it. That's all. That is the main stuff. It'll get it on iTunes. It'll get it everywhere you need to be, at least at first. Then as you keep releasing episodes, be consistent. Even if it's just once a month, pick a time frame that's doable and probably cut it in half because you think you can do more than you can all the time. That was at least me. And then just keep that schedule, and you will learn a lot. If you want to get famous guests, just start asking people that you think you could maybe get, and then it'll snowball. those well-known people will see the people you've had on your podcast, and they'll be more likely to come on as they've seen well-known guests. So it's just starting. That's my real advice. Is just freaking do it. You don't know anything, but no one knows anything when they first start.
I agree. It's no amount of reading about it, no amount of YouTube videos, how-tos, and all that, it will really get you anywhere until you sit down and start doing it. And so this brings like two questions. One of them is, what were some of the biggest mistakes that you did when you started? And then two, how do you keep things consistent in terms of producing on a consistent schedule?
That's a good question. I would say, first of all, don't be afraid of. Wait, so what? You had two parts. It was, how do you keep consistent? What was the other part?
So how do you consistently produce your podcast? And then the first one is, what were some of the biggest mistakes that you made that you've learned from as you were, getting into the podcasting thing?
Well, I was actually lucky because I edited podcasts freelance for other podcasters. So I actually got to learn a bunch of lessons through other people before I had to learn them myself, which was really good because I kind of got the luxury. But one thing I wish I had known earlier was just podcasting is not like other platforms where it's very easy to be found. If you don't do any like promotion or guest on podcasts or do anything like that, it's very unlikely that people are going to find your show. That's just how it is. Right. It's going to be people on your Facebook feed. When you share your episode, that's your audience, because no one else is. It's much harder to be discovered unless you're posting video. It's going to be rough. So I would always advise for people to just understand that it's a grind. It's going to take a long time, but there are things you can do, like guesting on a podcast, to get eyes on your podcast and for people to hear about it and listen to it. And one of the things that I actually think is really neat about podcasting is that the downloads are transparent, or they're not transparent. Nobody can see how many downloads you have. So as far as they know, you could be one of the big, gigantic podcasts in a gigantic network. They don't know. And so just act like you're one of those podcasts. Try to listen to some big network podcasts. Try to sound like them. And no one will ever tell the difference. As long as your content is quality, that's it. And I think that was my biggest thing, was I was trying too hard to I didn't understand the dynamic. So now that's something that I've learned now. But as far as, oh my gosh, I forgot your question again. So it was mistakes I made, and then the other part I forgot.
Yeah, about. Mistakes and how did you? Well, I think the mistakes were kind of like a key question, because I wanted to see. Well, you were lucky that you were already editing, so a lot of times, like on a technical side, you're like, especially if you're like a one-man show, you don't have like someone helping you out. Like, you got to make sure that is my mic recording? Are the levels right? Is everything good? Is there like static or some kind of other
and
things?
That will happen. Everyone that has ever recorded a podcast has recorded an interview and realized they hadn't hit record. Everybody in the world has done that. It's normal. It's going to happen. Just hope it's not. Yeah, exactly. See. And just hope it's not on your big interview with the giant celebrity that you were so lucky to get. Just hope it's just you, and you just did a bonus episode and you didn't record, and you can just record it again. But it's going to happen. That's okay.
And I've done that. Like when I was like one of my first guests, and I had this really in studio, really wonderful conversation. I was just so happy about it. And then I have two mics over here in the studio, and my mic was off. So like the whole audio for me was just kind of piggybacking from my guest's mic, which was echoey, which was a nightmare to fix up, and you can't ever fix it. And I was like, I'm just crushed. Yeah. And so now I'm like a checklist of things to do before starting a show. And
but that's what I mean. Like the way that you learned that, the way that you triple check everything now, that you do that because you messed it up. And it's better to make those mistakes than not make them. So just start it. And here's the other secret. No one's going to be listening to your podcast when you first start anyway, except like your family and friends. So make those mistakes early, right away, before people are listening to it. And then by the time you start getting an audience, you'll actually have a pretty good sound product.
That is so true. And yeah, and just learn from those mistakes. Write them down. Like make sure that you really, because a failure is good as long as we learn from it, right? If we
Yeah.
make a mistake, we don't, and then we do it again. We're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that again. So like now you should probably have a checklist or something. So some of those mistakes. What about when you start, and how did you start marketing other than like Facebook within your like social network? Have you learned anything from any specific type of marketing approaches that you've done that worked for you better than anything else?
Well, I have actually also dabbled as a social media manager. I worked for some YouTubers for a year as a social media manager. I know what you're thinking. What haven't I done, right? But I think it myself. I'm like, just pick a lane, dang it. But I worked as a social media manager, and what I saw, they have a really big audience. The family that I was working for, and they're most of their focus is on YouTube, but their other social networks not so much. They have maybe a couple thousand followers on each one. But it was interesting because we would see a spike in like likes and subscribers and stuff on other platforms when they posted a video. So even just posting a video on their main platform was enough to get them like a surge everywhere else. But
Interesting.
one thing that I noticed was that it's really hard to get people to switch between social networks, and that applies to like websites or podcasts. So really, clicking off of a website or clicking off of a social network, that's hard to get people to do. It's harder than you think. And so one thing that I've really tried to do is bring the content to them. So
What do
have
you mean by that?
pieces and chunks. And so this is one thing that I learned as a YouTuber specifically was I can upload my YouTube videos to Facebook. And if someone likes my content and they're looking at it on Facebook, it's easier to watch on YouTube. So I can say, hey, if you like this video, go find it on YouTube. So bringing the format to the place where the people are is way important. You can't recycle the same kind of post on every website, but you can create like a little like podcast cover art thing with a waveform that has the audio waveform, and then like the transcription of what you're saying. And that sounds like really fancy graphic design stuff. You can do it for free. There are websites that will do it for free.
Canva.
One is called Headliner.
Oh,
That's true.
headline.
Canva does it too,
Hmm.
but Headliner does it really well. Um, and you can just create one of those and post it. You're bringing the audio to the place where your people are instead of saying, "Hey, go listen to my podcast." You know, for example, on Twitter, it's not really made for video. It's not really good for that. But you can share little quotes from your guests, or you can share, something like that. That's a
Mm.
good way to do it. Is just think of where you're marketing it and use the strength of that platform instead of trying to muscle in wherever you are. And that's been my struggle, is trying to figure out what's the best format for each social network and things like that.
Do you find that by just experimenting, or do you have some kind of a source of authoritative information about what should be done nowadays, or both?
It's kind of neither. I mean, no, it's more experimenting, but like really, there's the thing about social media is there's no really good way to do it. There's no one way that works better than another way, especially because every single podcast and content creator is different. You're going to have a different audience because you have a different. Here's a good example. So the people that I was a social media manager for, they were like family vloggers. So they had tons of like moms and like younger kids that had just gotten Facebook accounts and things like that. And so their audience was all over the place, and it was very unfocused, and it was just random. It seemed like there was no way to really like figure out who the ideal person is. But on another page that I managed, they had it was like their content was directed at like young adults. And so, but it was interesting because they could kind of laser focus their posts and things like that onto the young adult
I
kind of
see.
demographic. But like I said, there's no real way to know um, what the best practices are, except for things like, oh, don't use too many hashtags, like da 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 da, things like that. You can Google stuff like that, like best practices for Instagram 2020 or things like that, you'll find the top result will be the best one for sure. But like you said, really just experimenting. When you get a lot of likes on a post, figure out why. Like, what was it about this that I didn't do last time? And then try to replicate it. And that's really what it's about, is just trial and error. And like I said, this is a perfect example of why to start, because you're going to be behind when you start. So might as well just do it when you have a little bit of, when you have a little audience and when you don't have too many people with their eyes glued on everything you're doing.
Yeah, that's right. Work out the kinks as you start. That's one of the things, and I'm curious what you think about that, because typically when you talk to either marketing people or advertising people or people kind of industry that try to help you promote your podcast, they're like, well, you have to focus on a niche. You have to know who your audience is. And it is true to a certain degree, but at the same time, I'll give you an example of my show. I talk to a variety of different people. I talk to doctors, book authors, CEOs, just a variety, people from all different disciplines and subject matter expert spaces. And for me to focus on just like one niche I would not have as much fun, I guess, because I would get bored. If I'm going to be just talking about, like, I don't know, computer motherboard, just some very specific thing, it's like, I'd be like, no, that's not for me. I'd love that. The whole point is like lifelong learning. The whole point is just to kind of learn from different people. So that kind of kills off the a niche, unless that's a niche, like those who want to grow personally, lifelong learners. I don't know if that's a niche then, but that's typically what they tell you.
That's the thing. It's hard to pigeonhole a person into like a little, like it's almost impossible. I'll give you a good example, right? So I'm on all these like Facebook groups about podcasters and things like that, and I came across this one guy he has a podcast about portable sanitation. So porta potties. He's in the porta potty industry. He has an entire podcast about that.
Quite a niche.
That's what I mean. But like, there is a market for that. The world is big enough that there are people that will listen to that, and he's going to find all of them because he's right in the center of it. And I think it's interesting because there is something to be said for wide appeal, but I don't know. I've always gone back and forth on this. Yeah. I feel like having a really wide appeal piece of content is good because more people are more likely to watch it. But also having a laser focused type of content is probably in a lot of ways better because you know exactly the kind of person who's going to watch it. If I'm making skateboarding videos, it's probably not going to be like middle-aged ladies watching it. I can basically kind of trim down some of the people who to target toward. And so it really just changes your strategy, I think, more than anything. Just kind of who's watching what. You need to figure out where to focus on. I mean, here's a good example. Some platforms will do better on some kinds of content than others. I mean, if your target audience is like I said, middle-aged women, Twitter's probably not your place. Facebook, probably. You'd be much better place for Facebook. So I think that's really what it is, doing your research on who's your typical listener. But like you said, I think that only applies to some degree. I don't know. I'm like literally just like retconning every single thing I'm saying. Like, this is true, but also perfect, the opposite of what I just said.
No, it's perfect. It's like, I think there is no right or wrong answer really, because on the one hand, you can say, well, look at this podcast. It's so popular and it's so the place to go because it's just so laser focused on a topic. And yeah, that's going to attract people that are really looking at that specific topic and they want that, not breadth, but depth of knowledge and information, right? And then you have podcasts like, Smarter Every Day or Joe Rogan stuff, which is about like a lot of different things, different guests, different topics, different disciplines. And people are like, well, he's sort of like all over the place. Yeah, but that's the point. You as a person who is interested in growing, maybe you're going to just stumble upon a subject that you knew nothing about. And here he is talking to someone who's a subject matter expert on that. And now you're learning a lot of stuff. And you're like, wow, this is crazy. I love it. I never knew about this. So it's maybe there's a place for a hybrid approach in which you have something that's maybe like a segment, right? Like, oh, we're going to have a new segment and it's just related to, I don't know, healthy eating or something, right? And then you're going to have something that's just going to be like conversations with just a bunch of different interesting people. That's kind of like what I'm striving at. But as I'm kind of developing this, And I'm talking to some professionals that are like, "Wow, you got to build your niche. You got to be very specific." I'm like, I don't know. Maybe there's a place for both of these things in the world.
Well, I think I think the best way to put it is do what you're doing, but like do it well. So
Right.
I think it's fine if you have there's a really good podcast here in Salt Lake City that just interviews people from Salt Lake City, but they interview everybody. There's been all kinds of like famous musicians, and there's been like uh, people from like the medical marijuana world, and like
Mm-hmm.
just anyone basically. And so there is a market for kind of a diverse type of content, and really, it's kind of interesting because that kind of approach can actually make it so you might not get as many listeners overall forever, but there is a better chance that one episode can spike and maybe you can get some listeners from that. A good example of that is Joe Rogan when he did Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
His audience is not Bernie Sanders
Bernie
people,
Sanders, right?
typically. And so, but when he went there, a lot of people that really like him and follow Bernie Sanders really closely watched that episode, and I'm sure many of them stayed. I think they liked what they saw, and so I think that's a good approach too. Is kind of make it general enough that you can get a wide audience, like a wide appeal. But then when you're specific, make sure you can kind of farm some of the niches interest groups. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I think, and I want your opinion on it. I know it's going to be might be slightly a little bit biased because you're in this industry, but what do you think about the trend? Maybe I don't know if it's a trend, but the coming back of the long format. Of podcasting, because it's typically like you want like these 20-minute shows that are like your average commute time, right? You want someone to listen to that one episode, and on the way back maybe they'll listen to another one. But then there's this space that I'm personally kind of like living in, which is like I want to podcast as long as it takes, as long as it's interesting, as long as it has value. You can always cut the clips out. You can always have, maybe make it into separate episodes. But I think it allows the space for your guests to explore, and it's not like this just rigid interview type of like, all right, we got 30 questions I'm going to ask you, and that's it. It's done. So what do you think about this? Do you think, what do you think about the long form podcasting space?
That's a really good question. I think I've heard a lot of podcasts that are way too long, and I've heard a lot of podcasts that are way too short. And I think that really you have to know where to stop and where to keep going. I think that's the real question here, because there are a lot of I think you're much more in danger of being too long than being too short. Mm-hmm. But I've listened to a lot of podcasts where I'm like, I want more. Like I already want more. I guess that's a good thing in some ways, but I guess this is really what it is. I think this is one of the beauties of editing. Instead of having an unedited, big, long podcast, you can chop out the very best parts, and you can shorten it, and you can kind of focus it into the best parts of it. Because I think the danger in podcasting is to kind of do a Joe Rogan and do a 3 or 4 hour episode on accident, like just to kind of keep rambling and talking and whatever. Joe Rogan is a very good interviewer, and I think that's why that works for him, is because he really can keep a guest interesting for that long without even really trying. But I think people struggle with that. And really, I think a shorter podcast allows you to ask the 5 questions that you really want to ask and that are going to be the very most interesting, instead of kind of answering the same things over and over and like the same type of things. And especially as a guest, like I've been there before where I'm like, I've said this, I've told my background a million times. And I mean, it's just like they're asking more and more and more questions about my background. And I'm like, okay, like, do you really want to keep going? Okay, we can keep doing that. But I feel like like I said, the danger is definitely in being too long. If you feel like your podcast is too short, you're doing something right, because you're cutting it to the point of, you feel like, oh, there's not enough bad stuff to cut. I think that's a good problem to have.
I'm trying to, I'm literally just, I want to pull it up, but there's a quote, I think it was by Abraham Lincoln, who was writing a letter to someone. And I think, I'm just going to paraphrase it because I don't remember the quote exactly, but it was something to the effect of, he was apologizing, saying, I'm sorry this letter is so long, but I didn't have the time to make it, short. So just like it was too wordy because he didn't have the time to kind of massage it into a more succinct version. So there's something to be said.
See, and that's what's cool about editing is because you can do that. You can go back and you can fix it and you can make it sound. And that's one of the things I like about the audio only format is that video kind of doesn't quite allow for, or rather, you can't have the illusion that it's just one solid stream of video. But with audio, you can make it just seem like it's just one conversation unedited, and that it's just super, super articulate. And I love that.
That's true. It's like smoke and mirrors in a way. You can kind of massage it the way you want.
Totally.
Cut things out.
Absolutely.
Video is very much unforgiving, like you said, because it's like, obviously the cuts will be apparent. How do you prepare for your interviews, for your podcasts? Do you have a set of questions that you come up with as kind of anchor points? Do you kind of roll with kind of like a question answer chaining when you talk to your guests, and you kind of piggyback from what they kind of talked about? How do you prep for it so that when you do have to edit, it is you put yourself in the best possible position to edit something to be really nice?
Well, and this is coming from a podcast editor. Podcast editing is a pain in the butt. So don't make yourself do it more than you have to, because it takes a long time, even under the best of circumstances. I've got a professional editing setup here, and it still takes me a long time. So just remember that the more you do to prepare, the better time you'll have editing. So number one, this is a mistake that I hear a lot of people make. Find out who you're interviewing. Don't just be like, do your research. Figure out what their content's called, what it's like. Watch a couple of videos. Take some time to actually prepare and see what they do. If they have a podcast, listen to one of their episodes. Find out who they are so that you can actually ask meaningful questions instead of just being like, okay, so who are you? What did you do? And I've had a lot of interviews that end up like that. And I feel like when people really dive in, and they find out more about you, and you can ask more meaningful questions, and it'll end up being a better experience for both of you, because they'll want to talk more about their lives and about their interesting stuff. But you can kind of skip all the BS about what does everyone ask them. You might even find another podcast they were on and kind of listen to their answers and skip those questions, because you're just going to ask them again. Especially if it's a more well-known guest, because they'll have more, they'll have answered those questions more times, honestly. Right. So do your research on who you're interviewing. I think another big thing too is it's just the simple stuff. Be on time, follow up with them, and make sure they, are willing to promote the episode and share stuff on Twitter and social media and things like that. I mean, even just a quick little reminder like that will go a long way. I can't tell you how many times I've just kind of forgotten. And it was like, they might have thought I didn't want to share the episode or something like that. But half the time it's just because it just got away from me. And they said, hey, can you mind sharing this on Twitter? And I'll be like, oh, sure. And I'll just do it right then. So I'm not saying I'm some celebrity, but I think a lot of people do make the same mistakes, even if it's not someone super well known. But that's definitely the biggest one, is research your guests. That's such a rookie mistake.
I agree. It's especially even if you tease out any specific piece of information that everybody overlooked, and if you ask that to the guests and they're like, "Oh, wow, okay, you really looked into this." Yeah. So it's engaging right away. So
have you ever heard of the interviewer? He's like a journalist, Nardwuar. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
So he's this guy who he interviews rappers a lot. I don't even know really what he does. I don't know if he's that works for some magazine or something, but he talks to rappers, and he's the last guy you would expect to talk to rappers. He's wearing golf shorts, and he has a perm and everything. But there's compilations of him asking questions that make everyone go, "How did you know about that?" They'll be like, "Oh, I have this thing you did in third grade," and they're always like, "Whoa, how did you?" And they're always way impressed. And I think if you can manage to do something like that, people get blown away, and they'll respect you a lot more. The interview will go better. I've actually done that a couple times, and it's amazing what kind of reaction you get.
I agree. Even if you would have something like that in your back pocket, like let's
Yeah.
say an interview kind of winds down, and you're like, boom, let's just drop this in over here and just kind of take it to the
Even if
next
it's something
level.
funny.
Right.
Yeah. Like even just
Uh,
like a quick like in one of the ones that he said was like, "Oh, do you still really like salt and vinegar chips?" And he's like, "Whoa, how did you know that?" Yeah.
Interesting slash borderline creepy, but everything for the
Yeah,
audience, I
no,
guess, in a way.
that's it's so good. Yeah, it works. It actually works.
On a technical side, how do you cope with? We both know that editing is a very joyful activity that we all like. We literally, we all want to do it all the time. That's how awesome editing is. So slash sarcasm over here. How do you prep yourself? What is your process to kind of deal with editing? Because it's, what can you automate? What can you not automate? What those who are considering to start a podcast right now, they need to know what they're going to be stepping into, because sometimes it may be a very overwhelming experience. What have you learned in your career to kind of make your life a little bit easier?
Well, I do have one secret, and it's that when you can outsource, if you can at all if you could spend money on anything in podcasting, I would say spend money on an editor before you spend money on a dang microphone. That's how big of a difference it can make. I actually have a guy that I found. He's kind of my virtual assistant. He works in the Philippines, where the cost of living is way lower. I figured out what the average salary was. I broke it down to one day, and I'll break it down to an hourly rate, and he edits so fast, and he's really good, and it costs me very little money, and he's happy because he gets to work freelance for not that much money, and I'm happy because I get to save time. I mean, obviously, I'm a podcast editor, so I know both sides of this.
Right.
But it's something to think about. If you can afford, I don't know, $50 a month, then you can maybe afford to do a couple episodes,
50 bucks a month?
through an editor.
What?
That's what I'm saying. You would be shocked. You
We
would be
need to talk
shocked.
offline. We need to talk offline, my friend. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so
But like
definitely
I said,
outsource. Anything
you're
else?
not trying to. It feels like you're cheating. It feels like you're cheating him out of money. But I've talked to them a lot, and they're like, "I'm just grateful for the work, and I can work on my schedule and online, and it's just a win-win, really."
Right.
But as far as like actually physically editing yourself, so the first thing is everyone's going to tell you what software to use and what's better than another one, and there's no such thing. Whatever you're comfortable using, that's going to be the best option for you. If you're on Mac, use GarageBand. It's free. It's really good. There's no reason not to use it. If you're on Windows, there's a lot of free options. There's Audacity is one that's kind of a little bit harder to use, especially right at first. There are some free options, but there's also some very cheap options. Reaper is one that costs $60, I think, and there's like a lifetime demo, so you could technically use it forever if you wanted to. So there are options, but it's just going to take time to learn them, and just be patient with yourself. Learn how to do a clean cut, then learn how to fade one piece of audio into another piece of audio, and then once you can do that, then learn how to you start to learn things like if someone takes a deep breath, you can't cut right after the breath because it's going to sound weird. So you have to like fade after they talk and before the breath. I mean, there's little tricks like that you will pick up over time. But don't worry too much about those. Focus more on the content and what the story that you're building. And of course, there are podcasts that are like ours. They're like we're doing right now, like the interview type podcasts that are much easier because there's a beginning, there's an end, and that's it. But then you have ones like true crime type podcasts or journalism type podcasts where you're bringing in all kinds of little pieces of audio and things like that. If you don't know what you're doing and you're trying to put together a podcast like that, definitely get an editor, because that's going to be a pain in the neck unless you do that. But most of the time when you're doing kind of a long form, one session of recording type thing, that works great. And there's minimal editing required. Here's another tip. This will save you more time than anything. Instead of saying the word just stop talking. Why are you saying It's because you're thinking of the next thing you're going to say. So just don't say it. I'm sure I've said it a million times already, but I can minimize them because I just stay silent instead. That's a trick that I learned in recording because it saved me that much time, but it's worth it.
I'm definitely guilty of that. It's
Everyone is.
a verbal crutch that we all kind of just lean on. But then
There's
if
a
you
million of
edit,
them.
if
So, like there's so many of them. And especially as an editor, I've edited out hundreds and millions of them in the episodes I've done. And everyone does it. Some people to bigger degrees and things. But if you can kind of consciously take time instead of saying, you can save yourself a lot of grief because of that.
I think in a way you have to be, if you're an editor, you have that extra because you've experienced, oh man, there's this I have to take it out over here. And so clearly I haven't done enough of it yet.
But even worse than filler words are ones where someone will go, they'll start talking and you'll say a phrase and then it just come out a little jumbled and then they just keep going. The trick there is if you're going to say something and you kind of stumble over your words, start over from that previous sentence. You can just do a clean cut every time. You don't have to hodgepodge it together. It makes it a lot easier. Like you're editing in real time. That's really what you're doing. And so that saves you a lot of, I even know people that they have one of those dog clickers and they'll just have it with them while they're recording. And if they do something if they want to cut something out, they just do a quick click on the dog whistle thing. And then they see it on the waveform when they're going to edit. Right, they just have a big, tall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they can just edit that out. I think that's smart, but I mean,
that is so smart. That is so smart.
Like,
unfortunately, that's not going to work on video.
Yeah, exactly. I could just go. Yeah. No, you're right. That's a trick. And that's, like I said, video adds a whole other layer of complication, but that's one of the reasons I love audio so much. It makes it that much simpler.
Yeah. So now that you have, let's say, an edited podcast, and the next biggest overwhelming thing that's facing you is posting all of that in different places, different social media platforms, and so on. Now that's much easier when you're doing an audio podcast because you can use one of these services, even like Anchor FM, where you can just upload it in one spot and it gets syndicated all over the place. If that's even a word anymore. So it's much easier in that respect. But then you have your Twitter, you have your Facebook, you have your Instagram, you have all these different social media platforms, and where you want to present that somehow in an appealing way that people will come in and listen to it. How do you automate that?
There is only so much you can automate because really each of those platforms kind of has different quirks and different things that here's a good example. On Twitter, if you use Twitter, you'll see that when you click on an image, it'll expand to a bigger image. But you have the option of having an image preview, which is just like a little sliver of the full image. So if you make your image the size of that sliver, then someone will see it so they don't have to click on it. It makes it that much more visible. So I make a couple of versions. I make square. Square is the king of everything. Do square on everything that you can because that's the thing that you can recycle is square video, square content. But what you can't do is, some platforms don't work as well with square. So on Twitter, for example, I just searched what's the Twitter preview image size. And then I made a graphic, that same graphic, but I just squished it into that big of an image, so that way it's a little bit easier to see and things like that. So it's kind of goes down to finding the quirks of each social network and things like that, because they are all going to be different. I mean, YouTube is a social network, even though people don't really view it that way, but there are quirks to it, and you can have links in the description of YouTube where you can't have as many links on other places. And so I think the biggest tip I would have with social media is, try not to recycle things where you can, but just have a format ready so you can kind of change the content a little bit for each thing. You can't put links in the description of Instagram, for example. So you don't want to copy paste, click on this link to go here. So it's knowing those formats. There are some websites. Maybe I'll send those over to you. You can share them with your followers that I use that are kind of good go-to kind of best practices for different social networks.
That'll be great. Anything you can share that we can put in the show notes, that'll be wonderful. sometimes there are tools that really allow you to automate certain things. But I totally agree with you that because of just variety of different formats, whether it's just like the size of the banner, the size of the preview image, or the video, and even like on Instagram, like if it's a post, it's square, but if it's the Instagram TV, then it's like another format. It's like they can't make up their minds, and that just adds on to the overhead of you producing something that's going to fit in all of that. So with experience, what comes is that you're trying to bunch up things in the center, so you have that square, and then if you have any other format, you just kind of expand on them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where it gets tricky, because you kind of have to go, is it really going to be worth it to make all this extra content just to kind of have it something up on a social network, or is it going to be worth it to take some extra time on podcasting specifically? Those do really well on Twitter. I don't know why. That's just kind of where the home is Twitter. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just kind of how it is. So finding out where your audience lives online, marketing to them directly, finding a way like to reach them specifically, and then targeting that with the best practices for that social network, that's going to be your best option, I think.
What are some of the biggest things that you got burnt on in terms of either outsourcing or stepping into something in terms of producing? Any lessons learned from as you were producing something, and then you're just like, wow, if I had known that, I would have never done that. Any lessons that you want to share?
Really, it's hard to say, because as an editor myself, like I said, I was lucky because I kind of had behind the scenes view on both podcast editing and being a YouTuber kind of all at once. I had like a view of those things before I ever started doing it myself. So I kind of halfway learned some of those lessons. It's the same as always, it's the things you always hear, not even in podcasting, but like, I didn't have a chance to, we missed a whole video because we were recording in a weird frame rate that made it skip. And there were things like that we had to go buy lights for my YouTube channel because we didn't realize that lighting was so important, because I had never really done it that much before. So literally any lesson that I could have learned comes down to the reason you haven't learned that lesson yet is because you haven't started. I can't think of it like a really good specific one, but for sure, every lesson that I have learned like that has been because I started and I just kept pushing at it and didn't give up. We've been doing my podcast Create Loud for over 2 years now, and we did have times where we had to pause and we had to come back and kind of not start over, but definitely we had a reduced audience, and it was hard, and it was tricky to keep going after seeing that much of a dip. But it's the consistency that has really made it easier going forward, just knowing that's what we're going to do. And if we have to take a break, we take a break, but then we keep coming. We keep coming back with new content. And so it is easy to get burnt out, especially at first, because you're going to have a YouTube video that you worked for 16 hours on, and it's going to get 36 views. And that sucks. That really, really sucks. But it won't be forever. And there's no point where you're going to go, oh, good, now it's better now. And it's going to happen so gradually. I mean, we just hit 1,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel after about a year, and it was slow going. We didn't have, but we had like the most we ever had at like in like a week was like 50. And it just slowly over a year just grew. And it was because we just didn't give up. We just kept going. And during the quarantine, that's why I started the second podcast, is because it was a way we could still create content, and we do it like this through video, but it was a way we could keep going and just continue on. So just think outside the box. If you have a limitation, figure out a way around it. That's probably the best advice I could give.
That's a really good advice. One of the things, so you have 2 podcasts, SideQuest Guys and Create Loud Podcast. Let's talk about those a little bit. And how are they the same? How are they different? Did you start separate podcasts because there were just different topics, and why, and on top of that, YouTube. And it's like that's a lot to do. So tell us a little bit more about those podcasts and your YouTube channel. Well,
the way that I am able to do any of these is because I have partners. I don't do it myself. I have people that are working with me, which that is the key here. I would not be able to handle all of the promotion and all of the production and things like that if I didn't have the partners on this with me. So, like I said, Create Loud, we started this about 2 years ago. Basically, we wanted a podcast that would inspire people to do what they love, to do something that they really wanted to do that they were maybe afraid to do, like being an artist or being a musician. It really focused on the arts at first. But then it kind of moved into just anybody doing something amazing or creative. I mean, we've interviewed everywhere from dancers to musicians to filmmakers and just basically any creative field that you could think of, YouTubers. And really it has evolved now into a show where we want to inspire people to follow their dream. And it might seem dumb, but hey, here's this guy that is famous for playing the spoons. You know, there's always going to be those people, and really, why can't you be one of those people? That's the main message here. And so
Right.
You can find us on the same as any podcast. We're on all the podcast platforms. Just search Create Loud. And that's that. Like I said, that's been going on for 2 years. My co-host Rachel is amazing, and she's on there every week. Side Quest Guys is a little bit different. I actually started that with a buddy of mine from high school. We've been pretty close ever since high school. But he just came to me one day and he said, "Hey, do you want to start a YouTube channel?" And I said, like, "What do you mean? Like, what about?" And he's like, "I don't know, but like, do you want to?" And so I kind of was like, well, I have all this knowledge from being a social media manager now about how to manage a YouTube channel and what best practices are. And so I kind of thought I kind of would like to do that, just to kind of as an experiment almost, to kind of learn more and to kind of figure some stuff out. And I thought, what would be a good way to do this? And I was talking to him, and we both thought we were starting to feel old. We both are in our, like, approaching our 30s. I know that doesn't seem old to a lot of people, but we were approaching our 30s, and we were like, I know. Well, that's what I mean. Is we were like, we started feeling like that was the first time either of us thought, oh, we're getting older now. And so we were like, we want to try stuff. We want to do stuff that we haven't done before. And so we kind of set it out. That's why it's called Side Quest Guys. Is the idea is it's like life's side quests. Like in a video game, when you have a side quest, it's not the main mission, but it's still something that you can do in the game. So we thought, what are some side quests? So we've done everything from, oh my gosh, we've been doing it for a year now. So you can imagine we've done everything from the world's biggest marshmallow gunfight to putting on mermaid makeup to, oh my gosh, we went to a Renaissance fair. We did all these things that were kind of outside of our comfort zone. Trying Korean food for the first time. There are so many of them that I can't even think of them all right now. But we wanted to get outside of our comfort zone, and so that's what we did. We've done all this stuff. That's a lot of fun. That's definitely on the comedy side. So if you like a good bit of comedy, it's kind of a mix between like. If you've seen Rhett and Link, it's kind of similar to Rhett and Link. We do a lot of food stuff, but then we also do a lot of stuff outside of the recording room. So it's a lot of fun. Go check out Side Quest Guys on YouTube. We're there. And then to top it off, Side Quest Guys, as you know, due to the pandemic and everything, we couldn't really film together, and we needed to. That was kind of part of it. And so I was like, okay, let's do a podcast because we had always talked about it. We both really love movies. And we both really love to make fun of bad movies. And so, of course, we both thought, okay, well, let's just watch some bad movies. So this is a brand new podcast I just started. It's called Skip-Worthy Cinema. We post episodes on the Side Quest Guys channel, but we're also everywhere you can find podcasts. Basically, we watch a bad movie and we talk about it. That's it. That's the whole podcast. It's much more loose. There's no real editing, and it's just the kind of our funny takes on it and stuff. But we started with Cats, the movie Cats from last year. It was real bad. Then we watched the Super Mario Brothers movie from the 90s, also very bad. It's just getting worse. And yeah, we have an episode going live on this week that is just horrific, and I am not looking forward to watching it. It's kind of torture, really. Making this podcast is not good. Neither of us really like it, but we're like, okay, we're doing it now. All right.
I listened to one episode and it was hilarious. I think it's such a good idea just to kind of, because everybody has these kind of almost like cult classics where they watch it like, this is a terrible movie, but I love it because I watched it when I was a kid, and it's just like, I don't know what it is, but I love it. And so yeah,
And or
it's
you look back
hilarious.
and you go, I didn't know it was that bad. Yeah, definitely check that out. We have a lot of fun, and we try to make it so you don't have to watch the movie necessarily, but you can,
Right.
and it makes it better if you do. But you don't have to.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Uh, what are some of the most unexpected things that you experienced while doing all of these different shows? In terms of, wow, that was a surprise to me. Has anything like that happened to you, where you were like thinking, oh, this is going to go this way for sure, and then boom, something else happens, or just like random stuff that was just like very surprising.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the biggest thing was that every type of content grows differently. We had Create Loud up for 2 years before we had any sort of reasonable sized audience. And like I said, with SideQuest guys, we kind of rocketed up in less than a year to 1,000 subscribers. 1,000 is still not this massive number, but for a year, I mean, as not having any other stuff online, I think that's pretty good, I think. Um, and I think the funny thing is that you realize that it's because it's different types of content. You just happen to be reaching the people that want to see this type differently. So don't be
Right.
too discouraged. I mean, you don't have to start 3 different content streams like I did. You definitely don't have to do that. Don't do that. Please don't do that. But what you can do is kind of, if you're asking what should I start my content about, you're already asking the wrong question. I did it, but it kind of fell into place. What you should be doing is saying, what can I talk about for 6 hours straight without even a question? I can just easily ramble for that long about it. And then, who do I have connections with that I could interview, or what could I do on a YouTube channel that nobody else could do, that would be really unique to me. And once you've found that, then you've found something that would be worth doing, and you can keep doing it. And I think that what has surprised me was, as soon as we figured out what that version of us was, then we started to explode, and we started to do a lot better. And um, once SideQuest guys wasn't about making silly videos, once it was like, oh, we're going to try things outside of our comfort zone, we started to get offers of people wanting to do stuff with us, and we started to get people saying like, I want to be on your YouTube channel and all this stuff. And once that started to happen, it kind of started doing it itself. We didn't have to go looking, and we didn't have to go begging. And it was, once it gets to that point, then you're in a good spot, because you can focus more on, promotion and things like that.
Speaking of promotion, what are some of the advices that you can share with everyone in terms of promotion, outside of like the typical things that everybody can do themselves, like post on Facebook here and there, and anything that you discovered that was like, wow, this was such a great opportunity to or great maybe return on investment. I don't know. Clearly going on being a guest on somebody else's podcast and kind of
Yeah.
leaning into their audience, right, is a one of those key things. When
Yeah,
you
collaboration with any
mm-hmm.
other type of creator, that's really good.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that you found that was like, wow, that was actually pretty cool. This worked unexpectedly well.
Well, here's something. If you start creating a podcast or YouTube channel, there's a 99% chance that even your family, is not going to listen to it. And you're going to go, no, 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 not my family. They're really supportive. They're really awesome.
They love my
They
stuff.
won't listen to it. Yeah, I'm sure they do. They won't listen to it. And this is what I'm saying. Like, go to them first. Go to your friends and family and say, listen, I really, really like this. I'm really, they're the people that you can have one-on-one conversations with. And you can say, I really am passionate about this. I think it's a lot of fun. Please listen to it. Please watch my content. I know that sounds like begging, but please watch it. I think you'd really enjoy it. And then ask them about it. Get on the spot and be like, oh, did you like our last video? And then they'll feel like, oh shoot, I can't skip any videos because they'll ask me. And really, those people are your base. You need to get those very, like, your siblings, your family and friends, your nieces and nephews, your people that are in your radius. They need to be your biggest supporters. They need to be the ones that are shouting about you all the time. And then you can radiate outward from there. I'm not saying you can't do it. You could, of course, people are big content creators without even their family knowing about it. I've heard. But I think the biggest thing you can do to kind of grow your base quickly and grow it in a way that is long term is involve those people closest to you. There's no shame in starting a Patreon and begging your friends and family for money because you want to keep creating content. They're going to be the first ones to contribute to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if they want to support you in what you're doing, why not let them? And I think that's really key. That's a source that a lot of people don't think of because they think of their family as their family. But they're also people that could listen to your content and they know you. So even more so. So start there. Start with people that know you first and then see where you can go with it.
I love it. that hasn't crossed my mind to start a Patreon yet. When your passion kind of gets into this space of like, wow, maybe I could make a living off of this. I think that's kind of like one of those critical moments where you start thinking a little bit differently. Initially, when you just kind of started as a hobby or just let's see where this goes. I think it's a great tool to get you out of your own kind of skin and shell, because like you have to lean into the awkward, you have to lean into the things that we're pushing, that you're pushing the boundaries, the envelope. You're like, man, I'm not a public speaker, I'm not this and that, but heck, I really like talking about this topic, so I can really ramble on it. And that's kind of like your way of kind of getting into it, and then you kind of hone your skills. And I'd say invest in yourself as well. Try to catch those things. Watch, as much as uncomfortable as that may be, watch what you're doing, your own shows, listen to your own shows, and take notes and just try to refine it. Get that refinement process going.
Another thing I was going to mention too is don't be afraid to shamelessly steal tactics and ideas from people that you follow that you think are good. If you follow someone that has a similar idea or similar design and things like that to what you do, don't be afraid to look at what their tactics are and just copy them and do what they're doing. Because if they're doing it, it's because if they have 1 million followers, they're doing something right. And so if you can kind of emulate that a little bit, you're going to be in good shape. Yeah.
What's that adage about emulation is the highest form of compliment or something like that? I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Copy, see what works. And it is a refinement process. So what is next for you? Where do you see your podcasts and your YouTube channels in the future? How far do you want to take this? Do you see this as something that you're going to be doing professionally, make a living out of? Maybe you are already. I don't know. What are you projecting, and how do you think you're going to get there?
So that's a good question. I've never really seen myself as like a YouTuber or like a podcaster, like as a career. I've never imagined that, of being like a professional content creator. However, media production, that type of stuff is something that I do. I have the skills, especially in audio, to create podcasts and things like that. So it does make sense that I would also do those things. Right. I've kind of always imagined it maybe being like a small revenue stream, even if it's not like my number one career. It's something that's making me some money on the side, and it's something I can do. And my main thing is audio production. That's kind of what my real skills lie in, and it goes hand in hand, obviously, having a podcast and a YouTube channel. But it's I don't know if I see myself being a full-time YouTuber, full-time podcaster, but I definitely would see that continuing in the future.
Do you think it's because, I think, so I'm going to sort of like answer it by answering how I feel about it.
No, go for it. Yeah.
I think there's a fine balance between making it fun and using it as a tool for personal growth, when it becomes a vocation when you need to make money to sustain yourself. I think it becomes, you may cross the roads in which you may need to sacrifice some things, and those may be very unpleasant or maybe even critically damaging points, like where you're going to be like, well, this is not really about this podcast anymore. It's going to be about making money because I have to live off of it. So I'm going to have to make some sacrifices. And I think that's why there is a sweet spot where people are, if this is just like a side income or something, and if it even is going to grow into this, then I don't have that pressure of like producing something that, because
Yeah.
otherwise I'm not going to be able to feed my kids or something, then I
Yeah.
think that's, you can still be you can still be genuine you, instead of like, oh, I have to mold myself into something that the audience requires in order to kind of support it. And so I think that's kind of like something that I'm fearing, that if I ever would want to
Yeah.
do this professionally, as in start a business that this would sustain living, then I would have to sacrifice some things, and I would probably not like that.
But you're right. I think you can kind of have the best of both worlds, where it is making you a little money and it is a tool to help your brand grow and help your, get some recognition for yourself. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be the thing you do. You don't have to be like a full-time anything. Like, no one's in charge of you. Like, do what you want. Work at a grocery store, but make some money podcasting. Like, why not?
Right.
So yeah, frame it like that. I think that's a good way to frame it, is that you can kind of, there's no such thing as like the path that everyone has to follow. So kind of make it your own. If you can have a couple side hustles and a part-time job and make that work for you and you enjoy it, then keep going. But if you're not happy, try to figure out how you can kind of change some stuff. If you think you could maybe make some money, maybe maybe you're a surfer and you know a local surfing out, like a apparel and supply company or something that would sponsor you, and you can get people to listen to your podcast about surfing. I mean, there's a different situation for everybody. And you're going to have different connections. You're going to have different abilities of creating content, things like that. And just it's figuring out what works best for your situation and what works for what your goals are. If you want to just make content and make people laugh, that's pretty much why I started this YouTube channel. It was because I just really like having people laugh. I don't care if I make money from it. I just think it's fun. And it's just a buddy and me just doing stupid stuff. Really, that's like all we're doing. But that's what I mean. That's good enough for me. Is just making a silly podcast and a silly YouTube channel, and maybe making a little money off of it. Maybe even just breaking even, so I'm not losing money off of it. That's all I really care about. But that's what I mean. And so for some people, they're like, no, I want to be a full-time YouTuber, and that will be different. Their strategies will be different, and yeah. But it's just knowing what you want. Goals.
Yeah, I think as long as you can have fun with it and you don't have the stress, if it doesn't become like a chore where you really despise doing it, then you know that you've crossed the road, you've crossed the point where you're like, maybe this is not for me anymore. But if you kind of keep it, where it's still interesting, you're growing with it, and you're learning new things, you're failing and you're learning from those mistakes, I think it's fun. It's a very therapeutic thing. I'd say it's definitely personal growth. For sure. And yeah, so any last as we're wrapping up, any last thoughts or shout outs that you want to send out over here? Any final tips or messages that you want to bestow on those who may start a podcast or a YouTube channel?
Absolutely. Your first one is going to be bad. It's going to be very bad. You're going to watch it in a year and you're going to think it's the worst thing you ever made. But if you don't make the first one, you can't make the second one, and you can't make the third one, and you can't make the 50th one that will eventually look good. So just make it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good it looks. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. Just start. You have a phone. Do it today. Do it right now. You have an idea, and you're thinking right now, how do I do it? Just do it. You have a phone. Everyone has a phone. Just make it. You can do it. There you go. That's my final tip.
I love it. I think it just speaks to the spirit of, you never know where this is gonna take you, and the journey may just unravel before your eyes, and you'll be like, wow, I never thought. It's going to be one of those fun stories. Think of it that way too. One day when you're going to be either successful or someone's going to be like, wow, how did you start? And it's like, you're not going to believe this story. I was not going to even make it. But then, like I listened to the show, and this guy just like whip out your phone and just start something. And then I was like, I kind of like it. And just one thing led to another, and here we are. And I think that
if that happens, you have to reach out to me, and you have to pay me $100. Just remember, if that happens to you, if you're really successful because of this video right here, you can Venmo me. It's fine.
Social bet now. All right, let's. No, I think that's great. That's great. Well, listen, Cody, I really appreciate that you took the time to do this. It was fun having you on the show. I've definitely learned some tips from you. You've been doing this for definitely longer than I have been, and you're still having fun. And I'm really looking to forward to checking out your other podcast that you started. And when this COVID pandemic thing goes away, I'd love to invite you to the studio over here and chat some more and collaborate on some ideas.
Totally, I'd love to do that.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Thanks.